Hello friends, welcome back to our military history channel. Today we are moving ahead and we'll discuss part 2 of chapter 6 about the loss of Jhangar. In this we'll discuss about the Cham and Akhnur operation. Let's move ahead. Let's discuss about the Cham Akhnur operation overview. Friends, let me start by highlighting the significance of Cham Akhnur operation in the context of 1947-48 conflict. This operation was a crucial part of the early military engagement between India and Pakistan, immediately following India's independence. The Cham Akhnur sector was a strategic region, and the operation conducted there had far-reaching implications for both military tactics and territorial control. What was the purpose of this operation? We might ask ourselves. The Cham Akhnur operation were designed to secure the region against advancing forces and protect vital supply lines and communication routes. The goal was to maintain control over key areas and prevent further incursion that could threaten the newly established borders of India. These operations were not just about defense, they were about asserting India's sovereignty and stabilizing the regions in a time of great uncertainty. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to remember that Cham Akhnur operations were more than just a series of battles. They were part of a larger narrative of India's struggle to define and defend its territorial integrity in the face of external aggression. This operation stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of the Indian forces during a critical period in our history. Let's start and move ahead. First, we'll start with the introduction. Friends, let me begin by discussing the refugee crisis in Cham and Akhnur, a significant aspect of the 1947-48 period that deeply impacted the region. The violence and conflict in these areas led to a massive influx of refugees, with thousands of people fleeing their homes in search of safety and security. And this sudden movement of population put immense strain on local resources and infrastructure, creating a challenging situation for both the refugees and the host communities. What was the impact of this crisis? We might ask ourselves. The arrival of so many displaced individuals overwhelmed the existing facilities, leading to shortage of food, shelter, and medical care. Local communities struggled to accommodate the refugees, while the government and aid organizations worked tirelessly to provide assistance under increasingly difficult circumstances. This refugee crisis not only highlights the human cost of the conflict, but also underscores the urgent need for effective humanitarian response and resource management in the face of such overwhelming adversity. Ladies and gentlemen, the refugee crisis in Cham and Akhnur was a stark reminder of the profound and far-reaching effect of conflict on civilian population. It showed us that beyond the battle and the military operation, there was always a human stories of loss, resilience, and survival. These stories remind us of the importance of compassion and solidarity in times of crisis and the need to support those who are most vulnerable as they rebuild their lives amidst the chaos of war. Next, we'll discuss about the initial Indian military operation. Let me take you back to the early days of conflict in 1947-48 to the initial Indian military operations in Cham and Akhnur region. Picture this. Fresh into independence, India was thrust into a chaotic and a volatile situation. Our forces had a mission to secure Cham and Akhnur, two strategically vital regions that were critical to maintain control over key routes and protecting our newly drawn borders. Now let's pause and think about what our troops were up against. They were not just fighting a regular battle, they were stepping into the unknown, facing fierce resistance and a well-prepared adversaries determined to seize these crucial areas. The terrain was tough, the enemy was entrenched, and every move was fraught with danger. But our soldiers showed remarkable grit and determination. They knew what was at stake, not just land, but the very integrity and security of the fledgling nation. Friends, this was not just about winning a battle. It was about asserting our sovereignty, about showing that India, even in its infancy as an independent nation, would stand firm and defend every inch of its territory. Our troops faced enormous challenge, but they stood their ground, demonstrating immense bravery and strategic prowess. They were fighting for more than just a piece of land. They were fighting for India's future. And here is why this matters. The initial operation of Cham and Akhnur were pivotal. They set the tone for what was to come, showing both resilience and resolve in the face of adversity. It is a story of courage under fire for a nation determination to protect its people and its border, no matter the odds. This is the spirit of India, a spirit that refuses to back down, that stands tall against all challenges. Let's talk about why Cham and Akhnur were a strategic hotspot in 1947-48 conflict. Why were these areas so fiercely contested? What made them so important? To put it simply, controlling Cham and Akhnur was absolutely vital for both sides. And here is why. These regions are the gateway to Kashmir, the region that was and still is of immense geopolitical importance. The control of these areas was not just about military advantage, it was about securing access to the entire Kashmir Valley, which is crucial for both tactical and symbolic reasons. Now let's zoom in on the map. Cham Akhnur are located in a narrow corridor, which serve as a critical access to the Kashmir. Whoever controls this area can effectively manage the movement of troops and supplies into the valley. It's like having a key to the front door. Control this door and you can decide who gets in and who does not. And then there is the Jhelum River, which flows through this region. This is not just any river. A Jhelum is a lifeline. It is a vital waterway that provides not only a natural defensive barrier but also a crucial supply route. And controlling the Jhelum means controlling one of the main arteries of the region. Something that is indispensable in both peace and war. Think of it this way. Friends, controlling Cham and Akhnur meant having a firm grip on the key to Kashmir and vital Jhelum River. And this is why the battle here was so intense and why both sides were willing to fight tooth and nail for every inch of the ground. The stakes were incredibly high. This was about securing the gateway to Kashmir and with it the strategic upper hand in the region. Friends, the control of these areas were crucial for ensuring the defense of Kashmir and maintaining a strategic advantage over the opponent. And that's why these battles were so fiercely fought and why the operation in Cham and Akhnur holds such a significant place in the history of India's military engagement. Moving ahead, we'll discuss about the refugee crisis and initial operation. Friends, let's talk about the refugee crisis that hit Akhnur and Jammu during the early days of 1947-48 conflict. Picture this. Thousands of people, families and children suddenly forced to leave their homes because of this violence. And these were ordinary folks, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers caught in the middle of the brutal conflict. They didn't ask for this war, they were just trying to live their lives. And then overnight everything changed. They fled with nothing but the clothes on their back, heading toward what they hoped would be safety in Jammu and Akhnur. But when they got there, what did they see? What did they find? A chaos. Thousands of people pouring into the towns that were completely overwhelmed. Towns that didn't have the resources or infrastructure to handle such an influx. And there was no room to breathe, let alone enough food or shelter. People were crammed into every available space, schools, temples, even open fields, and the situation was deteriorating by the minute. Now think of this from the perspective of the local communities. They were trying their best to help, but how much could they really do? Their resources were limited too. This was not just a crisis, it was a full-blown humanitarian disaster. Local authorities and aid organizations were scrambling to respond, but they were up against enormous odds. The whole area was in turmoil, and amidst all this, our soldiers were trying to secure the region. Let's not forget that the military was not just fighting a battle on the front lines. They were dealing with the massive humanitarian crisis right in their backyard. Thousands of displaced people, desperate and in need, adding another layer of complexity to an already chaotic situation. This was not just about securing territory, it was about protecting civilians who had been forced to flee their homes, ensuring they had food, water, and a safe place to stay. And this is the reality of war. Friends, it is a messy, it is chaotic, and it is affect everyone. The refugee influx to the Akhnur and Jammu was not just a side story. It was a central part of the conflict. It showed us the human cost of the war, the way it tears apart families and communities, and it underscored the urgency of Indian military operation in those regions. Our soldiers were not just battling an armed enemy, they were battling time and resources to save lives. The crisis put everything into perspective. It was not just about fighting a war, it was about defending our people, our land, and our dignity in the face of unimaginable adversity. And that's why these stories matters. They remind us of the real heroes, the ordinary people, and the soldiers who are in the face of chaos, showed incredible courage and resilience. Now let's talk about the Indian forces sweep operation in Cham and Akhnur, one of the most challenging and intense phase of the 1947-48 conflict. Imagine this, the Indian military just a few months into independence launching a bold and determined campaign to secure the Cham and Akhnur region. These areas were crucial not just strategically but symbolically. Controlling them meant securing vital access to the Kashmir and maintaining the integrity of India's newly defined borders. The Indian troops began these sweep operation with a clear objective: push the enemy out and secure the territory and establish firm control. But it was not going to be easy. Right from the start, they faced stiff resistance from well-entrenched enemy forces. The adversaries were prepared and positioned, determined to hold their ground. They had fortified their defenses, dug in deep, and used the rugged terrain to their advantage. And this was not just about firepower, it was about tenacity and strategy. The Indian forces, however, were equally resolute. They knew that every inch of ground mattered. The sweep operations involved advancing through narrow passes, crossing difficult terrain, and engaging the enemy at close quarters. It was brutal and grueling. The troops moved forward with precision, clearing out enemy positions one by one and often under heavy fire. They had to be swift and decisive. Even every bit of cover, every tactical advantage they could find to keep pushing forward. Friends, soldiers navigating treacherous terrain, advancing under barrage of enemy fire, and yet they didn't flinch. They fought with everything they had, determined to achieve their objective despite the odds. The enemy resistance was fierce. There were intense fight, ambushes, and counterattacks. The adversaries were not giving up without a fight, making every advance a challenge, every gain hard won. But this is where the Indian Army resilience shone through. They adapted to the challenging conditions, changing tactics on the fly, using flanking maneuvers, and launching surprise attacks to outwit the enemy. The commanders on the ground showed incredible leadership, making quick decisions and that turned the tide in many encounters. The soldiers demonstrated remarkable courage and discipline, staying focused on their mission despite the chaos around them. The sweep operations were about more than just a territory. They were about sending a message that India would defend its sovereignty and it would protect its people and its land at any cost. Friends, every success in Cham and Akhnur was a testament to the bravery and determination of Indian forces. They faced stiff resistance, but they did not back down. They kept advancing, kept fighting, and ultimately they secured the region. And this is the spirit of India, the spirit of never giving up, for fighting for what's right, and of standing strong in the face of adversity. The sweep operation in Cham and Akhnur are a powerful reminder of this spirit of the courage and the resolve that defines our nation. And that's why we remember these stories, because they are not just history, they are a part of who we are today. Let's discuss the strategic importance of Cham and Akhnur. Why these areas were so crucial in the 1947-48 conflict. Picture this. Right after independence, India was not just fighting to defend its borders, but also to secure key strategic areas that were vital for the future of the nation. Cham and Akhnur were two such areas, and controlling them was absolutely essential for several reasons. First, let's talk about their geographical significance. Friends, Cham and Akhnur are located in a region that serve as a gateway to Kashmir. Whoever controlled these areas essentially controlled the main access route into the Kashmir Valley. And this was not just about holding a piece of land, it was about controlling the lifeline to one of the most strategically important regions in the subcontinent. And if these routes were compromised, gentlemen, the entire region of Jammu and Kashmir would be at risk, potentially isolating it from the rest of India. Now let's add the Jhelum River to the mix. The Jhelum is not just any river, it is a vital artery that flows through the region and continues into the Kashmir Valley. And controlling the Jhelum means controlling a major supply route and a natural defensive barrier. It is like having a strategic stronghold that could protect the valley and provide a critical route for movement of the troops and supplies. For India, securing the Jhelum was about ensuring that they could effectively defend Kashmir and maintain a secure line of communication and logistics. Imagine the stakes. Friends, controlling Cham and Akhnur was not just a tactical move, it was a strategic necessity. The Indian forces knew that losing control of these areas could jeopardize the entire defense of Kashmir. It was not just about territory, it was about ensuring that India could maintain its sovereignty over a region that was critical for national security. But let's also consider the bigger picture. The control of Cham and Akhnur was not just about immediate military advantage. It was about shaping the future of India's presence in Kashmir. It was about establishing firm control over key strategic areas and sending a clear message that India would defend its territory and would not allow its newly established borders to be compromised. This is why the Battle of Cham and Akhnur was so fiercely fought, and every inch of ground was contested with such determination. It was not just the here and now, it was about securing the future, about ensuring that India could stand strong and protect its people and land. The strategic importance of these areas cannot be overstated. They were crucial for securing access to Kashmir, for controlling the vital Jhelum River, and for maintaining India's position in a region that continues to be of immense strategic significance. And that's the lesson here. Control over these areas was not just a military objective, it was a matter of national security. A matter of ensuring that India could protect its sovereignty and its people, and it was about standing strong and holding our ground no matter the cost. Moving next we'll have a look on the strategic importance of Cham. Now let's focus on the strategic importance of Cham and why this area was a focal point during the 1947-48 conflict. Friends, Cham was not just any piece of land, it was a game changer in terms of strategy and control. But why? Because of its vital location on Jhelum River, which made it access point to the Kashmir. Think of Cham as a gateway. Situated right along the Jhelum River, Cham allowed whoever controlled it to dominate one of the primary entry routes into the Kashmir. This was not just about having a strategic vantage point. It was about controlling the flow of people, goods, and military forces into the valley. Imagine a Jhelum River as a lifeline running through this region. And controlling Cham meant that you had your hand on that lifeline, dictating who could move in and out of the Kashmir. Now let's think about why that mattered so much. Kashmir was and still is a region of immense geopolitical significance. For India, maintaining access to Kashmir was a crucial for national security, sovereignty, and stability. If Cham fell into the hands of the enemy, it would have compromised the entire defensive position in Jammu and Kashmir. The control over this area was not just a tactical advantage but a strategic imperative. It was about making sure that India could protect its newly established borders and maintain its hold over Kashmir. Imagine the stakes on the ground. Our soldiers knew that every position held, every inch of Cham was crucial. The Jhelum River was not just a natural boundary, it was a strategic asset that needed to be defended at all cost. By holding Cham, the Indian forces could ensure that they controlled the critical access route into the Kashmir. And this control was essential for moving troops, reinforcing positions, and maintaining a steady flow of supplies. But it was not just about military logistics. Controlling Cham also meant having a psychological edge. It sent a strong message that India was determined to defend its territory and would not allow any breaches. And this was about demonstrating resolve and showing that India's newly gained independence could be defended fiercely with every strategic point secured and every access route protected. So why was Cham so important? Because its location on the Jhelum River was a gateway to Kashmir, a vital position that could determine the outcome of the conflict. The battle fought over Cham were about more than just territory. They were about safeguarding the future of Kashmir, securing India's border, and ensuring that our nation could stand firm in the face of any challenge. Cham position was crucial, and controlling it meant that controlling the destiny of the region. Now let's talk about the defensive advantage that made Cham such a crucial area during the 1947-48 conflict. Friends, Cham was more than just a strategic access point. Its rugged terrain and proximity to the Pir Panjal Range provided significant natural defensive position, making it a tough nut to crack for any advancing forces. Imagine the landscape of the Cham. It's not flat or easy to traverse. The area is characterized by hilly, uneven terrain, which automatically gives a defensive edge to those holding it. And for the Indian forces, this rugged landscape was a natural ally. It provided cover and concealment, making it difficult for the enemy to launch a direct assault. Any advancing forces would have to navigate through maze of hills and narrow passes, which made them vulnerable to ambush and counterattacks. And then there is the proximity to the Pir Panjal Range, a massive mountain range that adds another layer of defense. This range was not just a scenic backdrop, it was a formidable barrier. The steep slopes and high peaks provided elevated vantage points for monitoring enemy movements and launching strategic strikes. Holding positions close to the Pir Panjal meant having the high ground, which in military terms is a huge advantage. It allowed the Indian forces to see the enemy coming from miles away, giving them time to prepare and respond. The combination of Cham rugged terrain and its closeness to the Pir Panjal created a natural fortress. Defending troops could use the landscape to their advantage, setting up fortified positions that were hard to attack and easy to defend. It also made it challenging for the enemy to sustain prolonged offensive, as they had to deal with the difficult terrain, unpredictable weather, and constant threat of counterattacks from well-entrenched Indian positions. Friends, in the military strategy, terrain is everything. The ruggedness of the Cham coupled with the defensive heights of the Pir Panjal Range provided a formidable defense line. And it was not just about holding ground, it was about leveraging every natural advantage to protect the region and maintain control over key strategic points. For the Indian Army, the natural defenses were invaluable, allowing them to hold off enemy advances and secure the area despite facing intense pressure. So when we talk about Cham, we are not just talking about a location, we are talking about a natural stronghold. A rugged terrain and the proximity to the Pir Panjal Range gave Indian forces the crucial defensive advantage, making it a vital area to hold and defend. It is a perfect example how geography can shape strategy and why certain locations were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Let's delve into the enemy troops, concentration in Cham, and why this area became such a hotbed for intense military action during the 1947-48 conflict. Pakistani forces had amassed significant strength in the Cham area, turning it into a formidable stronghold and posing a serious threat to the Indian defenses. Picture this: Cham was not just another front in the conflict, it was a critical battleground. The Pakistani forces understood the strategic value of the Cham, much like the Indian forces did. They knew that controlling this area could potentially give them an upper hand in the broader fight for Kashmir. So they didn't just send a few troops, they amassed a significant force, heavily fortifying their positions and preparing for prolonged engagement. These troops not just positioned randomly, they were strategically placed to maximize the natural defensive advantage of the rugged terrain and proximity to the Jhelum River. The Pakistani forces dug in deep, establishing well-entrenched positions that were difficult to assault. They used the hills and valleys to set up strong defensive lines, making any attempt to dislodge them a daunting task for the Indian military. Friends, imagine the scene on the ground: heavily armed Pakistani troops with artillery and machine guns, ready to defend their positions at all cost. They were not only well prepared but also well supplied, making their fortifications even more robust. And this concentration of enemy forces in Cham created a significant challenge for the Indian Army, turning every advance into a fierce battle. The presence of such formidable enemy force was not just about numbers, it was about the psychological impact as well. The concentration of Pakistani troops in Cham sent a clear message. They were ready to hold this ground, to fight tooth and nail to maintain their positions. And for the Indian forces, this meant that every operation in the area would be met with strong resistance, with well-coordinated and heavily armed enemy units, prepared to counterattack at any moment. Friends, this formidable presence turned Cham into one of the most fiercely contested area of the conflict. The Pakistani forces were not going to give up easily, and the Indian Army knew that they had to match their strength with their own resolve and strategy. It was a test of wills, and with both sides understanding the high stakes of controlling this vital region. In the end, the concentration of Pakistani forces in the Cham underscored the strategic importance of the area. It was not just a fight over land, it was a battle for control, for dominance, and for the future of Kashmir. The heavy troops' presence made every engagement in Cham a critical encounter, and one that would have lasting impact for the conflict and for the region as a whole. Let's move on. Let's talk about the meticulous planning that went into the Indian Army attack on Cham. Friends, this was not just a rush into the battle, it was a carefully crafted strategy, and at the heart of it was a comprehensive reconnaissance. The Indian forces knew that it take on a heavily fortified enemy in such a challenging terrain. They needed every bit of intelligence they could gather. Indian forces facing a well-entrenched enemy that had turned Cham into a fortress. The stakes were high and every move had to be calculated. So what did the Indian military do? They went back to the basics. They conducted thorough recce. And this was not just a quick look around. It was an in-depth operation to map out every enemy positions, every fortifications, every potential ambush point, and every natural obstacle in the terrain. And this recce was about getting a lay of the land, The Indian Army needed to know exactly what they were up against, where the enemy troops were concentrated, what kind of defenses they had in place, and how the rugged terrain could impact their movement. The scout and intelligence officers on ground meticulously surveyed the area, often under the cover of darkness, risking their lives to gather crucial information. And this was not just about enemy positions. The terrain itself was a challenge. Chum rugged landscape with its hills, valleys, and proximity to the Jhelum River meant that every advance had to be planned with precision. The Indian forces used their recce effort to understand the lay of their land, identifying key routes, potential covers, and natural features that could be used to their advantage. They mapped out every detail down to the smallest hillock to the tree line, ensuring that they had a comprehensive understanding of the battlefield. The detailed recce enabled informed planning, and with a clear picture of the enemy's strength and the challenging terrain, Indian commanders could develop a strategy that maximized their strength and minimized their vulnerabilities. They could identify the best approaches for an attack, the position where they could gain a tactical advantage, and the area that need to be secured first to ensure a successful operation. Think about the value of this intelligence. It was not just about knowing where the enemy was. It was about anticipating their moves, understanding their defenses, and preparing for every possible scenario. And this kind of thorough planning is what gave the Indian forces the upper hand. They were not just reacting, they were proactive, making informed decisions based on accurate, real-time intelligence. The comprehensive recce conducted by the Indian forces was a game changer. It allowed them to execute a well-planned attack on the Chum, and one that was based on detailed knowledge of the enemy and the terrain. And this careful preparation was crucial for overcoming the formidable defense in Chum and ultimately securing the area. Friends, it is a perfect example of how intelligence and planning are key to the military success, turning the tide in the favor of those who are the best prepared. Let's talk about the importance of understanding the enemy's strength during the planning of the Chum operation. Friends, the Indian Army knew that charging blindly into the battle was not an option, especially when facing a well-prepared adversary. This is where intelligence gathering played a pivotal role. It was all about knowing what you were up against to devise a strategy that could effectively counter the enemy. Imagine the situation on the ground, friends. Pakistani forces had heavily fortified their defenses position in the Chum, creating a stronghold that was well defended and strategically significant. The Indian forces had to be smart about their approach. They couldn't afford to underestimate the enemy's strength or the complexity of the terrain, so they turned to intelligence gathering to get a clear picture of what lay ahead. Thorough recce and intelligence effort, Indian forces discovered significant concentration of Pakistani troops in Chum. These were not just isolated units, they were substantial forces, well armed and well positioned. The enemy had dug in deep, using the natural terrain to their advantage, setting up defensive lines that could be challenging to breach, and this information was crucial. It painted a picture of an opponent that was not only prepared to defend but also capable of mounting a fierce resistance. Knowing this, friends, Indian military leadership understood that any attack on the Chum would require careful strategy and planning. They couldn't rely on sheer numbers or straightforward advances. They need to outthink the enemy. The intelligence gathered helped them to understand the enemy's capabilities, strength, and potential weaknesses. It allowed them to identify where the Pakistani troops were most heavily concentrated and which positions might be more vulnerable to attack. With this knowledge in hand, the Indian forces could devise a strategy that focused on exploiting any identified weaknesses while minimizing their own vulnerabilities. It meant planning their attack routes carefully and deciding where to apply pressure and where to use diversionary tactics to confuse and disrupt the enemy. They could plan feints and maneuvers designed to draw the Pakistani forces into the less defensible positions, making them more susceptible to the Indian assault. Friends, this understanding of enemy strength also meant being prepared for a tough fight. The Indian commanders knew they were up against a formidable opponent and every move needed to be calculated and precise. They could not afford to make mistakes or overlook any detail. The intelligence gathered ensured that the Indian forces were not walking into a trap but were instead prepared to meet the enemy head-on, with a strategy that accounted for every possible scenario. Understanding the enemy's strength through diligent intelligence gathering was a key to the Indian army planning in Chhamb. It was not just about knowing where the enemy was, but about understanding their capabilities and readiness to fight. And this knowledge enabled Indian forces to develop a careful strategy, one that balanced aggression with caution and precision. It is a classic example of how in warfare, knowledge truly is power, and understanding your opponents can make all the difference between success and failure. Let's delve into the composition of Indian forces deployed in Chhamb operation. The Indian army didn't just send any troops into the battle. They deployed a well-equipped, battle-hardened force designed specifically to meet the challenges of Chhamb region and the formidable enemy they knew they would be facing. Friends, Indian forces drawn from various regiments, each with their unique strength and experience, coming together to form a robust fighting force. The backbone of this operation was the infantry, seasoned soldiers who were well versed in the ground combat, skilled in navigating difficult terrain, and experienced in close quarter battles. These infantry units were the tip of the spear, tasked with leading the charge, engaging the enemy head-on, and capturing strategic positions. But the infantry didn't operate alone. It was supported by powerful artillery units, which played a crucial role in the operation. Artillery was key to softening up enemy defenses, providing covering fire and disrupting the entrenched Pakistani positions in Chhamb. And these units, equipped with heavy guns and howitzers, could rain down shells on the enemy fortifications, creating opening for the infantry to exploit. The artillery's ability to deliver sustained, accurate fire made it a vital component of the attack, helping to neutralize strong points and reduce the effectiveness of the enemy resistance. And it was not just about infantry and artillery. The Indian Army deployment also included various supporting units that played essential roles in ensuring the operation's success. Engineers were there to clear obstacles, build bridges, and ensure that the advancing troops could maintain momentum despite the challenging terrain. Signal units were critical for maintaining communications across the battlefield, ensuring that orders could be relayed quickly and accurately, and that commanders had up-to-date information to make informed decisions. Similarly, medical units were also a key part of the composition, ready to provide immediate care to the wounded, demonstrating the army's commitment to taking care of its soldiers even in the heat of battle. Logistic teams ensured a steady flow of supplies, ammunition, and reinforcement, keeping the fighting force well equipped and ready for sustained operations. This was not just a haphazard collection of units. It was a carefully coordinated and well prepared force, brought together to leverage each element's strengths and capabilities. The Indian Army approach was holistic, combining firepower, mobility, support, and experience to create a versatile and resilient fighting forces. Each component, from the infantry to the supporting unit, was integral to the overall strategy, ensuring that operation could adapt to the fluid dynamics of the battlefield and overcome the significant challenges posed by the enemy and terrain. Friends, the deployment of such a well-equipped and battle-hardened force showed the Indian Army determination and readiness to secure Chhamb. It was a display of military might and strategic planning, combining the right mix of the troops and resources to achieve their objectives. And this composition was key to taking on the formidable Pakistani forces, demonstrating that India was not just prepared to fight but prepared to win. Let's talk about the execution of Indian attack on the Jhangar, particularly focusing on strategic deception tactics employed by the Indian forces. This was not just a straightforward assault. It was a carefully orchestrated operation where every move was designed to outsmart and outmaneuver the enemy. Friends, the Indian army knew that they were up against a well-prepared and heavily fortified enemy. The Pakistani forces were dug in deep, expecting a direct assault, but the Indian commanders had something different in mind. They knew that to succeed, they need to keep the enemy guessing, to create confusion and uncertainty, and that's where their clever deception tactics came into play. The Indian forces launched a series of feint and diversionary maneuvers designed to mislead the Pakistani troops about their true intention. They were not random acts, they were carefully planned to create a false impression of where and how the main attack could come. And by doing this, the Indian army aimed to draw enemy forces away from their actual points of the attacks, stretching their defense thin and make them vulnerable. For instance, friends, Indian units might stage an apparent build-up in one area, making a lot of noise, moving tanks and artillery pieces, all to suggest that a major offensive was imminent there. Meanwhile, the real assault would be prepared miles away in a completely different sector. And these tactics of misdirection forced the enemy to constantly shift their focus, redeploy their troops, and second guess their strategies. Another aspect of deception involved use of false radio transmission and fake orders. The Indian forces sent misleading communications that were deliberately intercepted by the enemy, conveying false plans and objectives. And this trickery made the Pakistani commanders believe that they had valuable intelligence, only to find out too late that they had been deceived. The brilliance of these tactics lay in their ability to sow confusion and create an element of surprise. And by the time the Indian forces launched their real attack, the Pakistani troops were off balance, unsure of where the main thrust would come. The element of surprise was a crucial factor, catching the enemy off guard and giving the Indian forces a significant advantage. And it was not just about surprise. These deception tactics allowed the Indian army to attack on their own terms, choosing the time and place that maximized their strength while exploiting the enemy weaknesses. It enabled them to avoid heavily fortified positions, instead targeting areas where the defense were weaker and less prepared. The execution of the attack on the Jhangar was a masterclass in strategic deception. It showed that Indian army was not just capable of fighting hard but also of fighting smart. And by employing clever deception tactics, they were able to outwit a formidable enemy, gain the upper hand and achieve their objectives with precision and efficiency. This approach highlighted the importance of strategy, cunning and adaptability in warfare, proving that sometimes the best weapon is a well-laid plan that keeps the enemy guessing until it's too late. Let's dive into one of the boldest moves of Jhangar operation, the daring river crossing of the Jhelum by the Indian troops. This was not just a routine maneuver, it was a meticulously planned and executed operation that played a crucial role in outmaneuvering the Pakistani defenses and turning the tide in favor of the Indian forces. The Jhelum River, a formidable natural barrier, flowing swiftly through a rugged terrain, and on the other side, heavily fortified Pakistani positions brimming with defense and ready to repel any assault. The river was both a challenge and an opportunity, and for Indian Army, crossing it was a key to gaining a tactical advantage, to striking the enemy where they least expect. The planning of this river crossing was meticulous. The Indian commanders knew that a frontal assault could be costly and likely ineffective against such a well-prepared defense. So they devised a plan that could leverage the element of surprise and exploit any vulnerabilities in the enemy's positioning. This was not just about getting troops across the river, it was about doing so in a way that could catch the Pakistani forces off guard and allow the Indian troops to establish a foothold on the other side. The operation involved a combination of stealth, speed, and precision. Indian engineers played a critical role constructing makeshift bridges and preparing ports under the cover of darkness. And these engineers worked tirelessly, often under enemy observation, to ensure that when the moment came, the crossing would be executed swiftly and efficiently. Their work was crucial in making sure that the river, which could have been a major obstacle, became a pathway to the success. At the designated time, the Indian troops began crossing. The operation was carried out with remarkable coordination and discipline. Infantry units moved across the river in boats, while artillery providing covering fire to suppress the enemy positions. Friends, this simultaneous assault from multiple directions created confusion among the Pakistani defenders, who were not expecting an attack from across the river. The surprise and audacity of river crossing threw the Pakistani defenses into disarray. Indian forces quickly established a beachhead on the far side of the Jhelum, securing strategic positions before the enemy could regroup and counterattack. And this bold move effectively outflanked the Pakistani defenses, forcing them to redeploy their forces and weakening their overall defensive line. But this was not just about crossing the river, it was about maintaining momentum once on the other side. The Indian troops, well prepared and highly motivated, didn't stop at the water edge. They pressed forward, exploiting the surprise and confusion they had created, moving deeper into the enemy territory and securing key positions that would prove pivotal in the overall operation. Friends, the successful crossing of the Jhelum River was a testament to the skill, bravery, and ingenuity of the Indian forces. It was a daring move that required precise planning and flawless execution, and it paid off in a big way. By outmaneuvering the Pakistani defenses, the Indian army was able to gain a decisive advantage, demonstrating that sometimes the boldest moves are the most effective. This operation was not just a tactical success, it was a master stroke that showcased the determination and the capability of the Indian forces to overcome any obstacle in their path. Let's talk about the intense close quarter fighting that defined the Battle of Chhamb. This was not just a distant exchange of artillery and gunfire, it was a fierce hand-to-hand combat, as Indian forces engaged in sustained, brutal fighting to overcome the enemy's stronghold. Friends, Indian troops advancing through the tough terrain, moving from cover to cover, closing in on heavily fortified Pakistani positions. The closer they got, the more intense the fighting became. And it was not a battlefield where you could rely on long-range artillery or air support to do that heavy lifting. This was combat up close and personal, where every soldier had to rely on their training, grit, and determination to push forward. The Pakistani forces had dug in deep, creating a formidable network of bunkers, trenches, and fortified positions. They were prepared to defend Chhamb at all costs, and they had the advantage of the terrain. And for Indian forces, this meant engaging the enemy in their stronghold, often fighting at point-blank range. The fighting was intense and relentless. Indian soldiers had to clear bunkers one by one, often using grenade and bayonets in the close quarter combat. The trenches became a scene of fierce hand-to-hand battles, with soldiers fighting not for territory but for survival. The smoke, dust, and chaos of the battlefield made visibility low, and communication was often reduced to shouted orders and signals. In such condition, every advance was measured in meters, and every gain came at high cost. Yet, despite the challenges, the Indian forces were undeterred. They knew that capturing Chhamb was crucial not just for strategic reason but for the morale and momentum of the campaign. Every soldier knew what was at stake. They fought with the determination and courage that comes from defending their homeland. The close quarter fighting required immense bravery and resolve. Soldiers on both sides were locked in a deadly struggle, with no room for retreat or hesitation. Indian troops pushed forward relentlessly, using every tactic they knew to dislodge the enemy from their positions. The battle was fought trench by trench, bunker by bunker, with Indian forces gradually breaking down the enemy's defenses through sheer tenacity and superior tactics. This was combat at its most raw and personal. The Indian soldiers had to overcome not just the physical defense of the enemy, but also their own fatigue, fear, and the harsh realities of war. The success of the operation depending on their ability to keep pushing forward, to keep fighting despite the odds, and to never give up. The intense close quarter fighting in the Cham was a testament to the determination and fighting spirit of the Indian forces. They faced a tough, well-prepared enemy and a challenging terrain, but they didn't back down. They fought with everything they had, demonstrating incredible courage and resilience. The battle was not just about capturing a strategic location, it was about showing the strength and resolve of the Indian army, proving that they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how formidable. Let's look at the aftermath of intense battle for Cham and how the Indian forces managed the situation once they had successfully captured the area. This was not just a matter of winning a battle, it was about ensuring that the victory was complete and the enemy had no chance to reclaim the lost ground. After the fierce and sustained fighting, once Cham was under Indian control, the next critical task was to consolidate these positions. The Indian forces knew that capturing Cham was only the first step. The real challenge was to secure their hold over the area, fortify their positions, and prevent any counterattack from the Pakistani forces who would undoubtedly attempt to regain the territory. The consolidation of positions involved several key actions. First, the Indian army moved quickly to establish defensive perimeters around the newly captured ground. They set up strong points, fortified as high ground, and created a network of trenches and bunkers to protect their soldiers from any immediate counter-offensive. The aim was to create a robust defensive line that would be difficult for the enemy to breach. Engineers and support units played a crucial role in this phase, rapidly constructing fortifications, clearing debris, and setting up communication lines to ensure that Indian positions were secure and well coordinated. They laid down barbed wire, set up minefields, and positioned artillery to cover potential approaches the enemy might use for a counterattack. And this comprehensive defensive preparation was crucial in denying the Pakistani forces any opportunity to regroup and launch a counter-assault. At the same time, Indian forces were also busy reorganizing and resupplying. And after the intense close-quarter battles, there was a need to regroup, tend to be wounded, replenish ammunition, and prepare for any eventualities. The Indian commanders were acutely aware that a swift response was needed to solidify their gains and stabilize the front lines. This meant that ensuring that every soldier was ready for whatever might come next. But consolidation was not just about defense. Indian forces also conducted aggressive patrolling and recce in and around the Cham, pushing out to secure the surrounding areas and detect any sign of enemy movement. And by keeping the enemy on the defensive and disrupting their attempt to regroup, Indian army maintained the initiative, ensuring that Pakistani forces couldn't even think about retaking the lost ground. The rapid and effective consolidation of positions in Cham was a testament to the Indian army discipline, preparedness, and strategic foresight. They didn't just capture Cham, they secured it, fortified it, and made sure that it remained firmly under their control. This swift consolidation denied the enemy any chance to regain lost ground, effectively sealing the victory and securing a strategic advantage in the region. In the aftermath of Cham engagement, the Indian army showed that it was not just capable of winning battles, but also of holding its gains and turning a hard-fought victory into a lasting strategic advantage. And this ability to consolidate and fortify positions was crucial in maintaining momentum and ensuring that the sacrifices made during the Battle of Cham were not in vain. Let's discuss the aftermath of Battle of Cham in terms of toll it took on Pakistani forces. The battle was intense and fierce and costed both sides, but it significantly impacted the enemy. Indian forces inflicted heavy losses on the Pakistani troops, and the result of this engagement was both tangible and decisive. Imagine the scene as the dust settled over the Cham. The Indian army, after a fierce close quarter combat and strategic maneuver, emerged victorious. The Pakistani forces, caught off guard and unable to withstand the relentless Indian assault, suffered substantial casualties. Many Pakistani soldiers were killed or wounded in the intense fighting. The battleground were marked by a heavy toll of war, reflecting the intensity and ferocity of the battle. But it was not just about the numbers of enemy soldiers killed or wounded. The Indian forces also captured significant number of Pakistani troops. And these captured soldiers provided valuable intelligence and insight into the enemy's strategies, morale, and capabilities. The capture of prisoners was a blow to the enemy's fighting strength and a morale hit of the Pakistani forces, further undermining their ability to regroup and counterattack effectively. Moreover, Indian forces didn't just gain ground, they seized a substantial amount of valuable military equipments. This included firearms, ammunition, communication devices, and even the heavier assets like artillery pieces and vehicles. The capture of such equipment was a significant gain for the Indian forces. It deprived the enemy of crucial resources while bolstering Indian own military capabilities in the region. Friends, the loss of equipment and supplies further weakened the Pakistani forces, leaving them less capable of mounting a strong defense or launching a counter-offensive. The equipment seized by the Indian forces was quickly repurposed to strengthen their positions and support ongoing operations, turning the enemy resources against them. And the impact of these losses went beyond the battlefield. The heavy casualties and the loss of equipment had a demoralizing effect on the Pakistani forces. The defeat in Cham, coupled with the significant loss in men and material, disrupted their plan and weakened their overall strategic positions. The Indian Army ability to inflict such damage and capture valuable resources demonstrated their tactical superiority and effectiveness of their planning and execution. In summary, friends, we can say that the Battle of Cham was a decisive engagement that not only resulted in the capture of strategically important territory but also dealt a severe blow of the Pakistani forces. The heavy loss in the troops and equipment highlighted the effectiveness of Indian Army strategy and their ability to adapt and overcome on the battlefield. And this victory was not just a momentum gain. It was a strategic win that had a lasting effect on the course of conflict, showcasing the Indian Army capability to inflict substantial damage on the enemy while securing and consolidating their gains. Let's focus on the strategic significance of capturing Cham and how it played a pivotal role in securing access to Kashmir. Friends, the capture of Cham was not just a tactical victory, it was a critical achievement that had far-reaching implications for ongoing conflict and for the Indian control over the Kashmir region. Think about the geography of the moment. Cham is located near a vital access route to the Kashmir. Controlling this area meant controlling a key pathway into the Kashmir Valley, which was of immense strategic importance. The region's terrain naturally funneled movement through a specific routes, and Cham was one of those crucial points. So by capturing Cham, Indian Army effectively seized a strategic gateway, which was essential for maintaining supply lines, troop movement, and overall control over Kashmir. Friends, this was not just about gaining ground, it was about ensuring the security and stability of the entire Jammu and Kashmir region. And with Chum under Indian control, the threat of Pakistani forces pushing this key access route was significantly diminished. The capture of Chum essentially closed one of the main doors that close have been used by the enemy forces to penetrate deeper into the Indian territory, and thereby preventing them from gaining a foothold in the Kashmir. Friends, securing Chum also had a significant psychological impact. It sent a powerful message that India was committed to defending its territory and would not allow its control over Kashmir to be challenged. It boosted the morale of the Indian troops and supporters, showing the Indian army could not only hold its ground but also take the fight to the enemy and win. On the flip side, the loss of Chum was a severe blow to the Pakistani forces. It disrupted their plan and weakened their strategic positions in the region, and losing such a critical access point meant their ability to maneuver and launch further offensive into the Kashmir was greatly reduced. It forced them to rethink their strategy and acknowledge their path into the Kashmir that had been effectively blocked. In the larger context of the conflict, securing access to Kashmir through the capture of Chum was a game changer. It was not just about the immediate tactical advantage, it was about shaping the broader strategic landscape. Friends, the victory in the Chum underscored the importance of strategic thinking and decisive action in warfare, proving that securing key positions can have a major implication for the outcome of the conflict. Let's move on and let's talk about the operations in Munawar and the surrounding areas where the Indian forces showed their mettle in securing yet another strategically vital point. After this, the fierce battle of the Chum, the Indian army was not ready to rest. They knew that to maintain their upper hand, they need to move quickly and secure the next key location, that is Munawar. Friends, Munawar was not just any town, it was a crucial strategic hub. Whoever controlled Munawar had control over important routes and the ability to monitor enemy movements. So the Indian forces got to work. They launched systematic operations to secure the town and surrounding areas. Now let me tell you, this was no easy task. The Pakistani forces were not going to let Munawar go without a fight. The Indian army, undeterred by the challenges, began a series of carefully planned offensives. They moved methodically, clearing out the enemy positions one by one. And this was not about rushing in, it was about precision, strategy, and determination. The enemy, knowing the importance of Munawar, had fortified their defenses, ready to repel any attack, but the Indian soldiers were up to the task. Imagine the intensity on the ground. Our troops had to engage in close quarter battles, moving through narrow streets and taking down enemy strongholds. Every inch of the ground was hard fought. The resistance was fierce, with Pakistani troops launching counter-attacks, trying desperately to hold their positions. But the Indian forces pressed on, using every tactic at their disposal to break the enemy grip. And here is the thing. This was not just a battle of brute force. It was a demonstration of tactical brilliance. The Indian army employed flanking maneuvers, coordinated assaults, and precise artillery strikes to outmaneuver the enemy. They adapted to the situation on the ground, showing flexibility and resolve, making sure that every move was calculated for maximum impact. Support units were right there in the thick of it, providing artillery cover, clearing obstacles, and keeping the momentum going. And this was a well-oiled machine, every part of working together to achieve the objective. And slowly but surely, the Indian forces began to turn the tide. And despite the continued resistance, our soldiers didn't back down. They knew what was at the stake. Securing Munawar meant denying the enemy a critical foothold, ensuring that advance made in Chum was consolidated and protected, and that's exactly what they did. They pushed forward, they fought hard, and they secured Munawar, proving once again that when it comes to defending our nation, the Indian army will stop at nothing. And this was more than just another victory. It was a testament to the courage, strategy, and unwavering spirit of Indian forces. They showed the world that India was not just holding the line but actively taking control, shaping the battlefield and securing our future. And that's the story of Munawar. A story of determination, of strategy, and of the relentless pursuit of victory. Let's talk about how the Indian forces employed some brilliant tactical maneuvers during the operation in Munawar and surrounding areas. This was not just about charging forward, it was about outthinking and outmaneuvering the well entrenched enemy. And let me tell you, the Indian army brought this their A game. The Pakistani forces were dug in, ready for a fight. They had fortified their positions, expecting frontal assaults, but the Indian troops had a different plan. They knew that a head-on attack would be costly and might not yield the desired result. So they decided to mix things up and keep the enemy guessing. One of the key tactics the Indian forces used was a flanking maneuver. Instead of attacking straight on, they moved around the sides of the enemy positions. Imagine it like a chess game. While the Pakistani forces were focused on defending their front, Indian troops were quietly moving to their flanks, ready to strike from unexpected angles. This tactics threw the enemy off balance. Suddenly their strong defensive positions were not so strong anymore. They were caught in a crossfire, unsure where the next attack would come from. But this was not at all. The Indian army was employed surprise attack to great effect. And under the cover of darkness or using diversionary tactics, they launched sudden assaults on key enemy positions. These attacks came out of nowhere, hitting the Pakistani forces where they least expected it. The element of surprise was crucial. It disoriented the enemy, caused confusion, and forced them to react rather than act, giving the Indian forces the upper hand. And let's not forget about the psychological impact. These tactical maneuvers were not just about gaining ground, they were about breaking the enemy's will to fight. And by constantly outmaneuvering them, the Indian forces made it clear that they were in control. The Pakistani troops, no matter how entrenched, found themselves overwhelmed and unable to predict their next move. It was a game of mental chess, and the Indian army was always one step ahead. The combination of flanking movement and surprise attacks were devastatingly effective. It allowed the Indian forces to bypass heavily defended positions, strike at the enemy weak point, and maintain the momentum of their advance. The Pakistani forces, expecting a conventional battle, were unprepared for this kind of dynamic and adaptive warfare. And this is what made the operations in Munawar and the surroundings area so successful. The Indian army didn't rely on sheer force. They used strategy, cunning, and tactical flexibility to achieve their objectives. They demonstrated that victory does not just come from strength, it comes from smart decision action, from knowing when to attack and when to hold back, and from always staying one step ahead of the enemy. This is the classic example of how the Indian forces excelled in using tactical maneuver to outmaneuver and overwhelm their opponents. It is a reminder that in warfare, as in life, the smartest move is often the one that catches your opponent completely off guard. And that's how you win battles, and that's how you secure victory, and that's how you protect your nation. Let's move on and let's talk about the Indian forces, how they achieve control and consolidation over Munawar and surrounding areas after some intense fighting. This was not just about winning a battle, it was about securing a lasting victory and making sure that enemy could not come back for more. After days of fierce and relentless fighting, the Indian forces had pushed hard, using a combination of tactical brilliance and sheer determination to break through enemy lines and capture Munawar. But capturing the town was only the first part of the mission. The real challenge was to hold it and ensure the enemy didn't have any chance to regain what they had lost. The Indian army knew that as soon as they took Munawar, they had to move quickly to consolidate their gains. This meant securing the town and surrounding areas, fortifying positions, and making sure that every inch of newly captured territory was firmly under their control. They were not just fighting a battle, they were shaping the battlefield for the future. The consolidation efforts were immediate and decisive. Indian forces set up defensive perimeters around Munawar, turning it into a stronghold. They fortified buildings, established lookout posts, and positioned artillery to cover key approaches. Every possible entry point was guarded, every potential weaknesses were strengthened, and the goal was clear: to deny the enemy any opportunity to launch a counterattack or regain a foothold in the area. Indian troops also cleared the surrounding regions of any remaining enemy forces. They conducted thorough sweeps, moving methodically through the terrain, ensuring that every last pocket of the resistance was neutralized. The aim was to secure not just Munawar but also the surrounding strategic points, making sure that the entire area was under Indian control. And let's not forget the psychological impact. The quick and decisive consolidation of Munawar sent a powerful message to the enemy, and that the Indian forces were not just winning battles, they were here to stay. The Pakistani forces, seeing their positions lost and chance of regaining ground slipping away, were left demoralized and disorganized. This demoralization further weakened their ability to mount any meaningful counter-offensive. The consolidation was crucial for maintaining momentum in the broader conflict, and with Munawar secured, Indian army could focus on further strategic objectives, knowing that their rear was safe and they had a strong defensive line to build upon. It was a textbook example of how to turn a tactical victory into a strategic advantage, demonstrating the Indian Army's capability to not only win battles but also to hold and build on their successes. So, by denying the enemy any chance to regain the lost ground, the Indian forces solidified their control over the region, ensuring that the path forward in the conflict was one of the strength and stability. And this was about more than just military might. It was about smart, effective strategy and the unwavering resolve to protect and defend every inch of hard-won territory. Moving next, let's talk about the formation of the 80 Brigade Group and how it played a critical role in bolstering Indian forces in Cham and Akhnur area. Friends, this was a strategic move that brought in additional manpower and capabilities at a crucial time in conflict, reinforcing India's effort to secure the region. The battle in the Cham and Akhnur was fierce, with both sides fighting tooth and nail for control of these strategically important areas. The Indian army had already demonstrated remarkable resolve and tactical ingenuity, but the intensity of the conflict required even more resources to maintain and expand their gains. And this is where the 80 Brigade Group came into play. Ladies and gentlemen, the formation of the 80 Brigade Group was a game changer. It was not just about adding more troops, it was about enhancing the overall capabilities of the Indian forces in the region. The Brigade Group was especially assembled to bring in fresh strength with a mix of experienced infantry, artillery, and support units. The idea was to create a versatile and powerful force that could not only hold the ground but also take the fight to the enemy. And with the 80 Brigade Group in place, the Indian Army gained significant reinforcements. This meant more soldiers on the ground, ready to defend key positions and launch new offensive. But it was not just about numbers. The brigade brought with the variety of capabilities that were crucial for the operation in Cham and Akhnur. There were units skilled in close quarter combats, artillery teams capable of providing heavy fire support, and engineers who could help to fortify positions and clear obstacles. The addition of the 80 Brigade Group allowed the Indian forces to be more flexible and dynamic in their operation. They could now conduct simultaneous offensive, keep pressure on multiple enemy positions, and rapidly respond to any new threats or counterattacks. It provided the Indian Army with the ability to adapt quickly to the changing dynamics on the ground, ensuring they could maintain their momentum and keep the enemy on the back foot. Moreover, the presence of the 80 Brigade Group served as a morale booster for the Indian troops already in the field, knowing that they had additional support, reinforcements, and increased firepower boosted their confidence and determination. It sent a clear message that India was fully committed to securing Cham and Akhnur and was prepared to deploy all the necessary resources to achieve that goal. And for the Pakistani forces, the formation of 80 Brigade Group presented a new challenge. They were already dealing with the Indian Army tenacity and tactical prowess, and now they had to contend with even stronger and more capable opponent. And this added pressure on their positions and stressed their resources, making it harder for them to maintain their defense or plan any counter-offensive. In the larger context of the conflict, the formation of 80 Brigade Group was a strategic masterstroke. It reinforced India's military presence in the key area, provided much needed additional capabilities, and ensured that Indian forces could continue their push to secure and stabilize the region. And this was about more than just bolstering numbers. It was about enhancing overall operational effectiveness and ensuring that India could decisively achieve its strategic objectives in Cham and Akhnur. So by bringing in the 80 Brigade Group, the Indian Army demonstrated its ability to adapt to the needs of the battlefield, to strengthen its forces at critical momentum, and to continue its fight with renewed vigor and determination. It was a move that underscored Indian commitment to defending its territory and showcased the Army's strategic depth and capability. Let's break down the composition of the 80 Brigade Group and why it was so effective in operation in Cham and Akhnur. The formation of this brigade was a strategic move that provided the Indian Army with the firepower and mobility needed to tackle the enemy in some of the most challenging terrain. Ladies and gentlemen, Cham and Akhnur are the region with a rugged terrain, full of hills, narrow passes and dense vegetation. It is a battlefield that's tough to navigate and even tougher to fight in. And to be successful here, you need a force that is versatile, well equipped and capable of both offensive and defensive operation. And that's exactly what the 80 Brigade Group brought to the table. The backbone of 80 Brigade Group was its infantry units. These were soldiers trained for ground combats, ready to engage the enemy at close quarters and adapt to the difficult terrain. The infantry in the 80 Brigade Group was a mix of experienced and fresh troops, all of whom were prepared to dig in and hold positions to push forward and assault enemy lines. They were the ones on the front lines, clearing bunkers, taking trenches, and moving through the challenging landscape with determination and skill. But the infantry didn't operate alone. Supporting them was a robust artillery component. Artillery units provided the heavy firepower needed to break through the fortified enemy positions and suppress their defensive fire. Equipped with heavy guns and howitzers, these units could deliver devastating barrage, soften up the enemy defenses, and providing covering fire for advancing infantry. In a region like Cham and Akhnur, where the terrain provided plenty of natural defenses for the enemy, the role of artillery was crucial. It allowed the Indian forces to neutralize enemy strong points and disrupt their formation from a distance. The 80 Brigade Group also included the various supporting units that were essential for maintaining operational effectiveness in such challenging conditions. Engineers were vital, helping to clear mines, build makeshift bridges, and fortify positions quickly. They ensured that infantry and artillery could move and operate freely, even in the most rugged areas. Signal units kept communication lines open, allowing for seamless coordination between different elements of the brigade. And this was critical for executing complex maneuvers and responding swiftly to changing battlefield conditions. The brigade had also logistic units to ensure a steady flow of supplies, ammunition, and reinforcement. And in a prolonged operation, keeping the troops well supplied and ready for action is key. And the logistic teams made sure that the 80 Brigade Group could sustain its operation for as long as needed. The combination of infantry, artillery, and support units gave the 80 Brigade Group the perfect balance of firepower, mobility, and adaptability. This composition allowed them to tackle the enemy head-on, conduct flanking maneuvers, and set up ambushes and respond to enemy movements with agility and precision. They could hold ground just as effectively as they could it, making them a formidable force in the region. Let's talk about the timely arrival of the deployment of the 80 Brigade Group and additional reinforcement and how they played a crucial role in maintaining the momentum of Indian forces in the Cham and Akhnoor region. This was a pivotal moment in the campaign where timing, strategy and execution all came together to secure key strategic positions and keep the pressure on the enemy. Indian forces had already been engaged in intense fighting to capture and hold vital areas like Cham and Munawar. The battles was fierce, the terrain was tough and the enemy was well entrenched and determined to hold their ground. In such a challenging environment, keeping up the momentum was key. The last thing the Indian army wanted was to give the enemy any breathing room to regroup or counter-attack. And this is where the arrival and the deployment of 80 Brigade Group and the additional reinforcement made all the difference. The Indian army needed fresh troops and additional firepower to reinforce their positions and push their advance. The 80 Brigade Group, with its well-balanced mix of infantry, artillery and support units, arrived at just the right time to bolster the Indian presence in the region. The deployment of these reinforcements was swift and strategic. The Indian commanders understood the importance of acting quickly to capitalize on their gains. The new units were immediately integrated into ongoing operations, filling gaps in the lines, reinforcing positions, and allowing for more aggressive maneuvers. And this not only strengthened the Indian defensive posture but also enabled the troops on the ground to go on to the offensive, pushing deeper into the enemy territory and securing additional key positions. Ladies and gentlemen, with the 80 Brigade Group in place, the Indian Army could maintain the momentum they had built up in earlier battles. They launched coordinated attacks to seize control of strategic points, leveraging the fresh manpower and capabilities of the reinforcement. The additional artillery provided much needed firepower to break through enemy fortification, while the infantry pushed forward to capture and hold ground. Supporting units ensured that the logistics were in place to sustain these operations, keeping the troops supplied and ready for action. The arrival of these reinforcements had a significant psychological impact as well. For the Indian troops already engaged in fight, it was a huge morale boost to see fresh units arriving to support them. It reinforced the idea that they were not alone, that their efforts were being backed up by the full weight of the Indian army. And on the flip side, for the enemy, seeing these reinforcements arrive must have been a daunting sight. It signaled that the Indian forces were far from exhausted and that the fight was far from over. In the broader context of the conflict, the arrival and deployment of these reinforcements demonstrated the Indian Army's strategic depth and ability to adapt to the evolving battlefield conditions. It showed that they were prepared to do whatever it took to achieve their objectives, bringing in the right units at the right time to keep the momentum going. And this was crucial in ensuring that the operations in Cham and Akhnoor were not just successful but decisive, solidifying India's control over these vital areas and setting the stage for further advances. Let's talk about the daily skirmishes and the defensive actions that Indian forces faced in the Cham and Akhnoor, a period marked by relentlessly enemy counterattack and need for unwavering resolve. Friends, the situation on the ground was intense, with the Indian troops constantly on high alert, ready to defend their hard-won positions against a determined enemy. The Indian army had secured key positions in Cham and surrounding areas, but the fight was far from over. The enemy, desperate to reclaim lost ground, launched daily counterattacks, hoping to wear down the Indian defense and find a weak spot to exploit. And these were not just isolated incidents, they were sustained efforts to push back and regain control. For Indian forces, this meant engaging in constant skirmishes day in and day out. And every sunrise brought new challenges, with the enemy testing their defenses, probing for vulnerabilities and launching assaults at the various points. It was a game of cat and mouse, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other. The Pakistani forces were looking for any opportunity to break through, but the Indian troops were equally determined to hold their ground. And hold their ground they did. The Indian forces employed a range of tactical maneuver to defend their positions effectively. They used flanking movements to surprise the enemy, hitting them from the sides and disrupting their advances. They set up ambush along likely approach routes, catching the enemy off guard and inflicting heavy casualties. And they used the terrain to their advantage, positioning themselves in the strong defensive locations that made it difficult for the enemy to gain any ground. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian soldiers on the front lines showed incredible determination and resilience. They knew that every position mattered, every inch of the ground was crucial, and they even were not about to give it up. Even when outnumbered for facing intense fire, they stood their ground, repelling attacks with disciplined fire and well-coordinated defensive actions. The spirit of the Indian Army was on full display, with troops fighting with the tenacity that showed they were not just defending positions, that they were defending their homeland. Friends, the constant skirmishes and defensive actions were not just a test of strength, but also of endurance and resolve. The Indian forces had to be ready for anything, prepared to adapt to changing conditions and respond to every enemy move. It was a battle of will, with the Indian Army showing that they had the grit and determination to hold their ground no matter what the enemy threw at them. In the end, Indian forces successfully defended their positions through a combination of tactical brilliance and unwavering resolve. They demonstrated that they could stand firm against constant pressure, using their skills and training to outmaneuver and outfight the enemy. This period of daily skirmish and defensive action was a testament to the strength and resilience of the Indian Army, proving once again that they were more than capable of defending their territory and securing their strategic objectives. Let's dive into some of the significant engagements and outcomes in the Cham and Akhnoor region, where the Indian Army showed remarkable strength and strategy. These were not just minor skirmishes, they were major battles that defined the course of the conflict. And despite facing fierce resistance from the determined enemy, the Indian troops managed to inflict heavy casualties on the Pakistani forces and capture several strategic locations. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine the intensity on the battlefield. Both sides knew the stakes were incredibly high, and for the Indian Army, it was not just about holding ground. It was about pushing forward, seizing key positions, and weakening the enemy's ability to fight back. Each engagement was carefully planned and executed with precision, with every soldier understanding their role and the importance of their mission. One of the significant engagements saw Indian troops launching a bold offensive to capture a well-defended enemy stronghold. The Pakistani forces had dug in deep, fortifying their positions and preparing for a tough fight. They had the advantage of the terrain, which they used effectively to create a defensive barrier that was difficult to breach, but the Indian Army was not deterred. They knew that breaking through this stronghold was crucial for gaining control over the region. The Indian forces launched a coordinated assault using a combination of artillery bombardment and infantry advances to overwhelm the enemy defenses. Artillery units played a key role, laying down a barrage of fire that softened up the enemy positions and disrupted their defenses. And this was followed by a well-timed infantry assault, with troops moving swiftly and decisively to close in on the enemy. Despite the fierce resistance, the Indian Army succeeded in breaking through the enemy lines and capturing the stronghold. The operation inflicted heavy casualties on the Pakistani forces, who were forced to retreat and abandon their positions. The capture of this strategic location was a major victory for the Indian forces, significantly weakening the enemy's hold on the region and opening up the new opportunities for further advances. Ladies and gentlemen, the outcome of this engagement was significant not just in terms of territory gain, but also in terms of overall strategic picture. And by capturing key locations and inflicting heavy casualty losses on the enemy, the Indian Army ensured that they maintained the upper hand in the region, setting the stage for further success and ultimately securing their control over Cham and Akhnoor. Moving next, let's talk about how the Indian Army managed to keep up the momentum and consolidate their gains in the Cham and Akhnoor region. This was not just a matter of fighting hard, it was about playing smart, using strategy, and taking full advantage of every opportunity. And the big part of that success was the timely arrival of reinforcement like the 80 Brigade Group. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian forces were already locked in the fierce battle, pushing forward, capturing key positions, and dealing significant blows to the enemy. They were making progress, but the fight was far from over. The enemy was not backing down easily, and the Indian army knew that to keep advancing, they need to bring in more resources. They need to sustain their offensive and make sure they didn't lose any ground they had gained. Enter the 80 Brigade Group. This was not just any reinforcement, it was a game changer. The brigade arrived just when it was needed most, bringing fresh troops, more firepower, and additional capabilities to the battlefield. And this was not just a morale booster for the troops on the ground, it was a signal that India was fully committed to this fight and ready to do whatever it took to secure victory. With these reinforcements, the Indian army didn't just hold their positions, they went on to the offensive. They launched a series of well-coordinated attacks, striking at the multiple points and keeping the enemy on their toes. The enemy was caught off guard, unable to predict where the next strike would come from, and this allowed the Indian forces to move in and capture even more strategic areas. But it was not just about the offense. The Indian army also knew the importance of consolidation. After every successful engagement, they quickly secured the new positions, fortified them, and prepared for any potential counterattacks. This proactive approach made sure that the enemy couldn't regroup or reclaim any lost territory. It was about turning every gain into a stronghold, making it impossible for the enemy to come back. And let's talk about the bigger picture here. The arrival of the 80 Brigade Group and the continued offensive operations were not just about winning battles. They were about shaping the entire conflict, and by keeping the pressure on and denying the enemy any chance to recover, the Indian forces made sure that they stayed in control of the situation. They dictated the terms of the engagement and the enemy was forced to react, always one step behind. The Indian Army ability to maintain momentum and consolidate their gains was a masterclass in the military strategy. It showed that with the right planning, the right resource, and the right mindset, you can not only win the battles, but also secure lasting victories. The timely arrival of reinforcement like the 80 Brigade Group was crucial in making this happen. And given the Indian forces the boost, they needed to keep pushing forward and ensure that enemy had no chance to regain the lost ground. In the end, this is what it is all about: being ready, being resilient, and always being one step ahead. The Indian Army showed that they had the resolve, the strategy, and the firepower to achieve their objectives and protect their territory. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you win not just a battle, but a war. Let's dive into the initial attempt by the Indian forces to advance toward the Chingas, a crucial objective in the broader operation to secure the Cham and Akhnur region. This was not just about expanding territory, it was a strategic move to further weaken enemy defense and gain control over key areas. After making significant gains in the Cham and Akhnur, the Indian army set its sight on Chingas, a strategically important location that could provide a significant advantage in the ongoing conflict. Chingas was crucial because it was positioned along key routes that were essential for controlling the movement of troops and supplies. Securing it would mean cutting off the enemy's ability to reinforce and resupply their positions, making it a priority target for Indian operations. The initial attempt to capture Chingas involved sweeping operations aimed at clearing the enemy out of the surrounding areas and securing a foothold closer to the town. Indian forces knew that this was not going to be an easy task. The enemy was well aware of the importance of Chingas and had fortified their defenses accordingly. As the Indian troops advanced, they faced stiff resistance from Pakistani forces who were determined to hold their ground and repel the attackers. The fighting was intense. The enemy had dug in deep, setting up defensive positions that made it difficult for the Indian forces to make rapid progress. Every advance was met with heavy fire, and Indian troops had to maneuver carefully to avoid being pinned down. The rugged terrain added another layer of complexity to the operation, with narrow passes and high ground favoring the defenders. But the Indian army was not deterred. They knew that capturing Chingas was crucial for maintaining the momentum of the campaign and further weakening the enemy's hold on the region. The troops pressed on, using tactical maneuvers to outflank the enemy and find openings in their defenses. Artillery units provided crucial support, targeting enemy positions and creating opening for the infantry to move in. And despite the fierce resistance, the Indian forces continued their push toward Chingas. They launched multiple assaults, testing the enemy's defense and looking for any weakness to exploit. The initial attempt to capture Chingas were tough, with the enemy fighting back fiercely, but these efforts were not in vain. Each attack helped the Indian army gather valuable intelligence on enemy positions and fortifications, allowing them to refine their strategy and prepare for the next phase of the operation. This phase of the advance toward Chingas was about more than just capturing a town. It was about wearing down the enemy, forcing them to commit resources and keeping them on the defensive. The Indian forces demonstrated their resilience and determination, showing that they were prepared to fight hard and do whatever it took to achieve their objectives. While the initial attempt to capture Chingas faced stiff resistance, they set the stage for the future successes. The Indian army relentless pressure kept the enemy on the edge, preventing them from regrouping or launching counterattacks. It was a clear demonstration of the Indian forces' resolve and their commitment to securing key strategic positions in the region. In the end, the advance toward Chingas was a critical step in the broader campaign to secure the Cham and Akhnoor region. It showed that the Indian army was not just defending its territory but actively taking the fight to the enemy, pushing forward and securing every inch of the ground. This phase of operation highlighted the importance of persistence, strategy, and adaptability in warfare, proving that even in the face of stiff resistance, the Indian forces were ready to push forward and achieve their goals. Let's talk about the challenges faced by the Indian forces during the operation in the Cham area, where the Pakistani forces had amassed significant strength. This was not a straightforward mission by any means. The Indian army had to deal with a formidable enemy presence that required meticulous strategy and planning to overcome. The Cham area was a vital strategic point and both sides knew it. For the Pakistani forces, holding Cham was crucial for maintaining their defensive lines and controlling key routes into the Kashmir. They had fortified their positions heavily, bringing in substantial troop reinforcements, artillery and supplies. The terrain itself added another layer of complexity with its rugged landscape and natural barriers, making it a challenging environment for any military operations. For the Indian army, this meant facing a well-prepared and deeply entrenched enemy. The Pakistani forces had created strong defensive positions with bunker, trenches, and strategically placed artillery that covered the approaches to their lines. They had also positioned themselves to take full advantage of the terrain, using the hills and ridges to create natural choke points and defensive barriers. Ladies and gentlemen, this presented several challenges for the Indian forces. First and foremost was the sheer strength of the enemy. The Pakistani forces were not just in large numbers, they were well equipped and ready for a prolonged fight. Any attempt to advance would be met with a heavy resistance, and Indian army had to be prepared for fierce combat every step of the way. Then there was the issue of the terrain. The Cham area was not easy to navigate. The Indian troops had to move through narrow passes, cross rivers and deal with the dense vegetation, all while under the constant threat of the enemy fire. And this made coordinated maneuver difficult and required careful planning and timing to execute effectively. Intelligence gathering became a key component of this strategy. The Indian army conducted extensive recce missions to identify enemy strength, weaknesses, and potential point of attack. And this information was crucial for planning their operation, allowing them to target specific areas where they could achieve a breakthrough. In addition, Indian army employed a variety of tactical maneuver to outflank the enemy, strike from the unexpected angles, and keeping them off balance. This included night operations, diversionary attack, feint designed to draw the enemy's attention away from the main thrust of the assault. And despite the formidable challenge, the Indian forces were determined to press on. They understood that capturing Cham was not just about taking a piece of land, it was about gaining a strategic advantage that would have far-reaching implications for the rest of the conflict. They showed incredible resilience and adaptability, using their training, experience, and ingenuity to overcome the obstacles in their path. In the end, the Indian Army's ability to face these challenges head-on, adapt their tactics, and execute their plans with precision was a testament to their skill and determination. It showed that even in the face of the well-prepared and formidable enemy, careful strategy and planning could turn the tide in their favor. This phase of operation in Cham highlighted the importance of preparation, intelligence, and adaptability in achieving success on the battlefield. Let's talk about the importance of the Cham operation and why they were a game changer for the Indian Army. The capture of Cham was not just another victory, it was a decisive move that secured a key access point to Kashmir. This area was crucial because it controlled one of the main routes into the Kashmir Valley. And by taking Cham, the Indian forces effectively cut off the Pakistani military ability to move troops and supplies, significantly weakening their position. Securing Cham gave the Indian Army a stronger defensive line and a solid base for further operation. It was not just about holding territory, it was about taking control of the conflict and dictating the terms. This victory was a huge morale boost for the Indian troops and a major blow to the enemy. It showed that Indian Army was not only capable of defending its territory but also taking the offensive and winning. The capture of Cham shifted the momentum, putting India firmly in the control and setting the stage for further success in the conflict. Moving ahead, let's talk about the strategic importance of Jhangar in the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, Jhangar was more than just a location on the map. It was a vital stronghold with significant strategic value. Situated near the Pir Panjal Range, Jhangar offered natural defense advantage that were hard to beat. The rugged terrain and elevated positions provided a natural barrier against attack, making it a formidable position for any force trying to hold ground. But that's not all. Jhangar was also key to controlling access to the Kashmir. Whoever held Jhangar could monitor and manage the movement of the troops and supplies through the region, making it a critical point for securing or threatening Kashmir. And this made Jhangar a highly contested area, with both sides understanding that its control could shape the outcome of the conflict. For the Indian forces, holding Jhangar meant having a strategic advantage that would help them to protect Kashmir and keep the enemy at bay. It was all about locations, defense, and the ability to control vital access routes, making Jhangar a key piece in the larger strategic puzzle. Let's dive into the story of the Jhangar, a crucial piece of the puzzle in the conflict that often overlooked. Jhangar was not just another dot on the map. It was a fortress strategically positioned near the Pir Panjal Range. Why was this so important? Because whoever controlled Jhangar controlled a key access point to the Kashmir. The rugged terrain and the high elevation provided a natural shield, making it incredibly difficult for any enemy to advance. And this was not just about holding ground, it was about holding power, influence, and control over a vital route into Kashmir. Now let's talk about the Indian forces. They knew the value of Jhangar, and they were determined to hold on to it. The troops there were not just sitting around, they were actively fortifying their positions. And we are talking infantry on the front lines, ready to engage the enemy head-on, and the artillery units strategically placed to deliver devastating blows to any advancing forces. And behind the scene, you had the unsung heroes, the engineers, working day and night to strengthen fortifications and keep these crucial supply lines open. This was not just a defensive stand, it was a masterclass in military strategy. The Indian forces turned Jhangar into an impenetrable fortress, using a natural terrain and the firepower to their full advantage. They were prepared for anything, ready to repel any attack and maintain control over these key strategic locations. Holding Jhangar was not just about winning a battle, It was about securing a future and protecting the access to Kashmir. And that's how you turn the tide in a conflict, with smart planning, relentless execution, and a clear understanding of what at stake. Let's talk about the fierce battle that erupted at Jhangar, a hotspot of intense fighting during the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, Jhangar was not just any battleground. It was a strategically vital area and both sides knew it. Positioned near the Pir Panjal Range, Jhangar was the key to controlling access to Kashmir, and the Indian forces were determined to hold onto it at all cost. The fighting here was not for the faint of heart, who are talking about intense close quarter combats where every inch of ground was fiercely contested. The Indian troops were right in the thick of it, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand fighting to maintain their hold on Jhangar. The enemy was relentless, launching attack after attack, desperate to break through the Indian defense and seize control of these crucial locations. But the Indian force stood their ground. With sheer grit and determination, they repelled wave after wave of enemy assault. And this was not just a battle for territory, it was a battle of wills. The Indian soldiers knew what was at stake, and they were prepared to fight tooth and nail to protect their positions. They used every tactic in the book, flanking maneuver, ambush, and counterattack to keep the enemy at bay. Ladies and gentlemen, Jhangar became a symbol of resistance, a testament to the courage and tenacity of the Indian forces. They fought with everything they had, turning the rugged terrain to their advantage and holding their ground against overwhelming odds. The Battle of Jhangar was fierce, brutal, and unrelenting, but the Indian army proved they were up to the challenge, showing the world that they could hold their own and maintain control over these strategically vital areas. Let's talk about the unyielding pressure at Jhangar, where the Indian forces faced relentless enemy attack day in and day out. Jhangar was more than just a strategic position, it was a lifeline to Kashmir, and both sides knew that whoever controlled it had a crucial advantage. The situation at Jhangar was intense. The Indian forces were engaged in continuous skirmish with the enemy, who were determined to break through and reclaim the area. Every day brought a new battle, a new challenge, a new test of the Indian army resolve. The enemy didn't let up, launching attack after attack, trying to find any weaknesses in the Indian defenses. But the Indian troops were unshakable. They were prepared for anything, responding to every enemy move with a fierce determination and tactical brilliance. They held their position with a mix of courage, strategy, and sheer willpower, proving time and again that they wouldn't give up Jhangar without a fight. And these days' skirmish were not just about holding grounds, they were about sending a message. The Indian forces were showing the enemy that they were here to stay, and they were ready to defend Jhangar with everything they had. And this was about resilience, about standing firm against constant barrage of attacks, and about demonstrating that Jhangar was firmly under Indian control. Through this relentless battle, the Indian forces showcased their strength and their commitment to defending these strategic areas. Jhangar was not just another position on the map, it was a symbol of Indian resolve, a place where the soldiers proved their mettle every single day, standing strong against all odds. Let's talk about the significant attack on Jhangar, where Pakistani forces launched major assault in a desperate attempt to capture these vital positions. Jhangar was a crucial strategic point and both sides knew its importance. For the Pakistani forces, taking Jhangar would mean a major breakthrough, giving them a clear path into the Kashmir. The attack on Jhangar were relentless. Pakistani forces threw everything they had it, launching wave after wave of assault in their bid to seize control. They were determined to break the Indian defense and knew that capturing Jhangar would change the course of the conflict. And these were not just skirmish, they were a full-scale offensive designed to overwhelm and push Indian troops out. But the Indian forces were ready. They knew the stakes were high and their losing Jhangar was not an option. As the Pakistani forces pressed in, the Indian troops fought back fiercely, engaging in the brutal close-quarter combats to defend every inch of their position. And this was not just about holding ground, it was about making a stand, showing that they would not be driven out. every assault by the Pakistani forces was met with fierce resistance. The Indian troops used everything at their disposal: artillery, small arms, tactical maneuver to repel the attackers. They dug in deep, leveraging the natural terrain of Jhangar to create formidable defensive lines. The battle for Jhangar was intense, with the Indian forces fighting with everything they had to maintain control. The significance of these attacks cannot be overstated. They were some of the most intense battle in the conflict, with both sides throwing their best effort into the fight. For the Indian army, holding Jhangar was more than just a strategic position. It was about defending their territory and proving their strength. And through sheer determination and skill, they managed to hold the line, keeping Jhangar firmly in Indian hands despite the relentless pressure. Let's talk about the key dates and the outcome of the intense battle fought at Jhangar. This was not just another skirmish in the conflict, it was a series of critical engagements that had a significant implication for control over Jhangar. At Jhangar, the fighting reached its peak during the several key dates when the Pakistani forces launched massive assault to seize these strategic locations. These were not isolated attacks, they were a well-coordinated offensive aimed at breaking the Indian defense and gaining a crucial foothold in the region. The stakes could not have been higher, and the intensity of the battles reflected that. And despite the ferocity of the enemy's attack, the Indian forces held their ground. They were prepared for the onslaught, and every soldier knew the importance of defending Jhangar. During these key battles, Indian troops not only repelled the Pakistani advances but also inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy. The terrain played to their advantage, and the Indian army tactical acumen shone through, allowing them to hold strong against overwhelming odds. Ladies and gentlemen, by holding Jhangar and pushing back the enemy, the Indian forces secured a vital strategic location. And this was not just a defensive victory, it was a statement. The Indian army proved that they were capable of withstanding intense pressure and maintaining control over key areas. The successful defense of Jhangar demonstrated their resilience, determination, and readiness to protect Kashmir at all cost. These battles at Jhangar were a turning point in the conflict, showcasing the strength and resolve of the Indian forces. They were not just fighting for territory, they were fighting for the security and stability of the Kashmir. And with every attack repelled, they reinforced their holds on this vital location, ensuring that Jhangar remained firmly under Indian control. Moving further ahead, let's dive into the final attack on the Jhangar, the pivotal moment in the conflict where Pakistani forces made last-ditch effort to capture this strategically vital town. Jhangar was not just another position, it was a crucial stronghold near the Pir Panjal Range that controlled access to the Kashmir. Both sides knew that whoever held Jhangar would have a significant advantage. In a bold move, the Pakistani forces launched a major offensive aimed at breaking the Indian defensive line and taking control of Jhangar. This was their final push, a do or die attempt to seize the town and turn the tide to the conflict. The assault was massive, involved coordinated attacks with heavy artillery barrage, infantry advances, and attempt to outflank the Indian position. They threw everything they had into the offensive, hoping to overwhelm the Indian forces and force a retreat. But the Indian troops were ready. They had fortified their positions, anticipating such a move. And as the enemy closed in, the Indian forces responded with fierce resistance. The battle was intense, with close quarter fighting and constant exchanges of the heavy fire. The Indian soldiers held their ground, refusing to give even an inch. They leveraged their defensive preparation, utilizing the natural terrain and fortified positions to repel the assault. And despite the intensity of the attack, the Indian forces managed to hold the line. They inflicted heavy casualties on the Pakistani troops, breaking their momentum and forcing them to pull back. The enemy's final assault on Jhangar had failed. This was not just a defensive victory for the Indian army, it was a decisive moment that solidified their control over these key strategic positions. The successful defense of Jhangar in the face of such a determined assault was a testament to the strength, resilience, and determination of the Indian forces. It showed that they could stand firm against any challenge, protect their positions, and maintain the upper hand in the conflict. The final attack on Jhangar marked the end of the enemy's hope. of capturing this vital town and demonstrated the Indian Army's unwavering commitment to defending their territory. Let's talk about the fierce resistance put up by the Indian troops during the final attack on Jhangar. This was no ordinary battle. It was a testament of the unwavering determination and courage of Indian forces as they faced an all-out assault from the Pakistani military. As the enemy launched their major offensive to capture Jhangar, the Indian troops knew they were in fight of their lives. This was a do or die moment, and the stakes could not have been higher. The Pakistani forces were coming in hard, throwing everything they had into breaking the Indian defensive line and seizing this strategically vital town. But the Indian soldiers were ready. They dug in with their heels, prepared to defend their positions no matter what. As the enemy closed in, the fighting became intense and brutal. We are talking about close quarter combat where every soldier had to rely on their training, instinct and sheer willpower to hold the line. The Indian troops engaged the enemy in fierce hand-to-hand fighting, repelling waves of attack with relentless resolve. The determination of the Indian forces was unmatched. They fought with everything they had, using every tactical maneuver to outsmart and outfight the enemy. It was not just about holding ground, it was about protecting their comrades and defending their homeland. The Indian soldiers knew what was at stake, and they were not about to let the enemy break through. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the Indian troops managed to hold their positions and repel the enemy's onslaught. Their fierce resistance forced the Pakistani forces to retreat, marking a decisive moment in the Battle of Jhangar. This was not just a tactical victory, it was a powerful demonstration of Indian Army's strength, resilience and commitment to defending their territory. The fierce resistance at Jhangar showed the world that what the Indian forces were made of. They stood their ground in the face of the relentless enemy, proving that they could overcome any challenge with courage, determination, and an unbreakable spirit. Let's talk about the eventful withdrawal of Indian forces from Jhangar, a tough decision made under immense pressure. Despite their valiant effort and fierce resistance, the Indian forces were ultimately compelled to withdraw due to the overwhelming pressure and numerical superiority of the Pakistani attackers. Imagine the situation, gentlemen. Indian forces had been holding Jhangar with everything they had, engaging in intense close-quarter combats and repelling a wave after wave of enemy attacks. The determination and bravery of the Indian troops were undeniable as they stood their ground against a relentless assault. But the reality of battlefield was harsh. The Pakistani forces kept pouring in, bringing more troops and firepower, determined to break through the Indian defense and capture this vital position. And despite their fierce resistance, the sheer number of enemy forces began to take this toll. The Indian troops were outnumbered and stretched to their limits. Every soldier fought with incredible courage, but the odds were becoming unsurmountable. The situation grew more desperate as the enemy attack intensified, pushing the Indian defense to the breaking point. And in the face of overwhelming pressure and recognizing the risk of being completely overrun, the Indian commanders made the difficult decision to withdraw from Jhangar. It was not a decision made lightly. They knew the strategic importance of the position, but they also understood that preserving their forces for future battles was crucial. The withdrawal from Jhangar was a tactical move, a necessary step to avoid unnecessary losses and regroup for the next phase of operation. The Indian forces withdraw in an orderly manner, ensuring they maintain their cohesion and readiness to fight another day. This was not a defeat of spirit, it was a strategic decision reflecting the realities of warfare where sometimes even the bravest soldiers have to pull back to fight smarter. Despite being forced to withdraw, the Indian troops' defense of Jhangar was a testament to their valor and resilience. They held the line against overwhelming odds and demonstrated their unwavering commitment to defending their territory. The withdrawal from Jhangar was a reminder that in battle the fight is not always about holding every position, but about making the right decision to achieve the long-term success. Moving ahead, let's talk about the consequences of losing Jhangar and what it meant for the Indian forces. Ladies and gentlemen, the fallback of Jhangar was not just a strategic setback. It came back with heavy cost in terms of both manpower and equipment, significantly impacting the Indian Army ability to continue the defense. Imagine the aftermath of fierce Battle of Jhangar. Indian troops had fought valiantly, engaging in intense close-quarter combat to hold their ground against a determined enemy. But despite their best effort, the overwhelming pressure and numerical superiority of the Pakistani attackers forced a difficult withdrawal. The retreat from Jhangar was not without its sacrifices. The loss of Jhangar resulted in significant casualties for the Indian forces. Many soldiers were killed or wounded in the brutal fighting, and the chaos of withdrawal made it difficult to recover all of the injured. These casualties were a heavy blow, not just in terms of numbers but also in morale. Every soldier's lost or hurt was a reminder of the high cost of this conflict, affecting the spirit of the troops who had fought so hard. In addition to the human cost, there was substantial equipment loss as well. The rapid withdrawal under intense enemy pressure meant that Indian forces had to leave behind valuable equipments, artillery, vehicle and supplies that could not be evacuated in time. And these losses weakened the Indian Army overall combat capability, making it harder to mount a strong defense in the subsequent phase of the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, losing Jhangar and suffering these casualties and equipment losses was a significant setback for the Indian forces. It weakened their immediate ability to defend other strategic areas and forced a reassessment of their positions and tactics, but also underscores the harsh reality of the war and importance of adapting quickly to the new challenges. Despite these losses, the Indian Army resolve remained strong, and they continue to fight with the determination, learning from the experience and preparing for the battles ahead. The loss of Jhangar was a significant strategic setback for the Indian military, impacting their overall positions in the conflict. Jhangar was not just a piece of territory, it was a critical access point to Kashmir, a region that was crucial for both sides. Holding Jhangar meant having a strong defensive position and control over vital routes into the Kashmir. When Jhangar fell, it compromised the Indian Army ability to control these key routes. The strategic importance of Jhangar lay in its location near the Pir Panjal Range, which provide a natural barrier and a strong defensive line. Losing this position meant that Indian forces had no longer had a foothold in this vital area, making it more challenging to protect the routes leading to Kashmir. The loss of Jhangar allowed Pakistani forces to gain a strategic advantage, giving them opportunity to push further into the region and threaten others' critical locations. It disrupted Indian defensive plan, forcing a reorganization of their forces and a reassessment of their strategy in the area. This setback highlighted the high stakes of the conflict and underscored the importance of key strategic locations like Jhangar in maintaining control over Kashmir. The fall of Jhangar had a profound impact on the morale of Indian troops, who had fought with the incredible determination to defend this vital position. For soldiers on the ground, Jhangar was more than just a strategic location. It was a symbol of resilience and commitment to defending their homeland. Imagine the emotion toll on the troops who had engaged in intense close-quarter combats day after day, repelling wave after wave of the enemy attacks, and they had given everything to hold the line, believing in the importance of maintaining control over the access point to Kashmir. And when the order to withdraw came, it was not just a tactical retreat. It was a tough blow to the spirit of the soldiers who had been on the front lines. The fall of Jhangar was a reminder of harsh realities of the war. It highlighted the challenges of facing the numerically superior enemy and difficult of holding ground under relentless pressure. However, even in the face of this setback, the Indian troops remained resilient. They knew that setbacks are a part of warfare, and they had to regroup and refocus for the battles ahead. The loss of Jhangar was a blow to the morale, and it also reinforced their determination to continue the fight and defend their nation. Moving ahead, let's talk about the Indian response to the loss of Jhangar. A tough setback, no doubt, but one that didn't break the spirit of our forces. The moment Jhangar fell, the Indian Army knew that they had to act fast. And act fast they did. They deployed the 80 Brigade Group and other reinforcement to the Cham and Akhnur area. This was not just about sending in more troops, it was about bringing in a well equipped, battle hardened unit and ready to face the enemy head on. The 80 Brigade Group brought fresh manpower, more firepower, and the mobility needed to tackle the enemy in the rugged terrain. We are talking about a comprehensive force with infantry ready to hold the line, artillery units providing heavy support, and engineers working around the clock to fortify positions and keep those crucial supply lines open. This was about getting back on our feet, reinforcing our defenses, and showing the enemy that we were far from defeated. The Indian Army quick response was not just about defense, it was about maintaining momentum. They knew that losing Jhangar was a setback, it was not the end. With the new reinforcement, they could refocus and push forward, securing key strategic positions and keeping the enemy on the back foot. It was a powerful reminder that while setback happens, what matters is how you respond. And the Indian military response was clear: regroup, reinforce, and keep fighting to protect our nation. And that's how you turn a challenge into an opportunity. And that's exactly what they did. Let's talk about how Indian forces took their strategy to the skies, using air support to turn the tide of the battle. After the loss of the Jhangar, it was clear that fight was far from over. The Indian Army knew they needed every advantage to maneuver the Pakistani forces and maintain their offensive, and that's where air support came in. With the Indian Air Force in action, the troops on the ground gained a significant edge. The aircraft were not just flying overhead, they were conducting crucial recce mission, gathering vital intelligence and movement. This was about knowing exactly where the enemy was, what they were planning, and staying one step ahead at all times. But recce was just the beginning. The air support also provided close air support, swooping in to hit enemy positions with precision strikes. These aerial attacks were game changer, disrupting enemy formation, breaking up assault, and providing cover for the Indian troops to advance. When the enemy tried to regroup or bring in reinforcement, they were met with devastating fire from the above. And let's not forget about the disruption of enemy supply lines. The Indian Air Force targeted convoys and supply routes, making it incredibly difficult for the Pakistani forces to get the resources they needed to sustain their operation. This was not just about winning battles, it was about choking off the enemy's ability to fight back, cutting off their supplies and leaving them scrambling. With air support playing such a crucial role, the Indian forces were able to outmaneuver the enemy, sustaining their offensive despite their fierce resistance. And every time the enemy tried to regain the lost ground, they were met with a well-coordinated response from both the ground and the air. The Indian Army showed that they were ready to fight in all fronts, using every tool at their disposal to keep the momentum going and ensure that the enemy never got the upper hand. And in the end, the use of air support was a key factor in denying the enemies any chance to regain the lost ground and maintaining the Indian forces. It was about leveraging every resource, adapting to every challenge, and proving that when it comes to defending our nation, we will always rise to the occasion. Last, let's talk about the resolute defense and tactical brilliance of the Indian troops on the ground. After the setback at Jhangar, ladies and gentlemen, the Indian Army knew that they had to dig in and defend their positions fiercely, and that's exactly what they did. The troops were engaged in constant skirmish and major battles, facing relentless pressure from the enemy, but their determination never wavered. The Indian forces didn't just stand their ground, they fought back with strategy and precision. They employed a range of tactical maneuvers to keep the enemy off balance, and one of their key strategies were flanking movement, where they would attack the enemy from the sides, catching them off guard and breaking through their defenses. This was not just about holding a line, it was about outsmarting the enemy and turning defense into offense. And then there was a surprise attack. The Indian troops were master of unpredictability, launching sudden assaults when the enemy least expected it. These surprises attack was crucial in disrupting enemy plan, inflicting heavy casualties and capturing key strategic locations. Every time the enemy thought they had the upper hand, the Indian forces would hit back with a new tactic, proving that they were always a step ahead. Through a combination of resolute defense and smart tactical maneuver, the Indian army was able to inflict significant damage on the Pakistani forces. They showed that they were not just defending their territory, they were actively taking the fight to the enemy, capturing strategic positions and maintaining control over critical areas. This was not just about survival, it was about demonstrating strength, strategy, and the unwavering resolve to protect our land. In the face of constant challenge, the Indian troops proved their mettle, fighting with everything they had and showing the enemy that they were prepared for any situation. Their tactical maneuver and fierce determination ensured that Indian army stayed in control, no matter what the enemy threw at them. It was a powerful display of courage and skill, reminding everyone that when it comes to defending our nation, the Indian forces are second to none. Ladies and gentlemen, here we come to the end of part 2 of chapter 6, Loss of Jhangar. Please do like, share and subscribe with your friends and stay tuned for more updates. Thank you.